When we think about learning, we often picture students in a classroom or a lecture hall, books open on their desks, listening intently to a teacher or a professor. But in psychology, learning means something else. To psychologists, learning is a long-term change in behaviour that's based on experience. Two of the main types of learning are called classical conditioning and operant or instrumental conditioning. Let's talk about classical conditioning first. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. And after a while, the dogs would associate the bell with the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they'd get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dog salivate. They'd learnt to expect food at the sound of a bell. You see, under normal conditions, the sight and smell of food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call the salivation the unconditioned response. Nobody trains a dog to salivate over some steak. However, when we pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral, like the sound of a bell, the neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. And so, classical conditioning was discovered. We see how this works on animals, but how does it actually work with humans? John Watson was an early proponent of the behaviourist movement, and he maintained several things. Firstly was tabula rasa, blank slate. We are all born the same, knowing nothing. There is nothing inherent or genetic in our knowledge base. This is true for humans and also for animals. We learn everything through a stimulus-response mechanism. He proved this to himself in an experiment which is now infamous, and this involved a 9-month-old orphan baby who he referred to throughout his experiments as Little Albert.
Watson designs an experiment for an infant known as Little Albert. He's so confident, he films it for posterity. At first, Albert shows little fear, even when Watson places a burning newspaper in front of him. Albert is also unafraid when he encounters a white rat for the first time in his life. But then Watson shows Albert the rat accompanied by a loud clanging noise. One of the few things that upsets little Albert. And he does it again. And does it again. Eventually, Albert learns to fear not just the rat, but all furry things, even without the loud noise. In Watson's mind, the Little Albert experiment is a success because it proves that fears are learned, not inherited.
Today, the Little Albert experiments are remembered more for their ethics and how to deal with children experiments than they are for their findings. As a footnote, John Watson was sacked from his job soon after these experiments ended, but not for teaching a small baby to be fearful of Father Christmas or a teddy bear, but instead for having an affair with his co-researcher on the project.